So thank you, Senator. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel, Michael Morella. Michael is Director of Waterfront and Open Space Planning for New York City Department of City Planning. He directs waterfront land use policy for the agency and advises the City Planning Commission on issues affecting waterfront and open space across all 5 boroughs. Michael served as project director for Vision 2020, which is the city's comprehensive waterfront plan offering a long-range vision for the city's waterfront. He was born in New York, but as I learned just a few minutes ago, not necessarily bred in New York. But as a fellow New Yorker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael and welcome him up. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. First, let me say thanks to the Senator for her remarks. I think she really hit the mark, and I wrote this down, how to manage this great resource in the balance. I think that really captures very much what we're going to be discussing this afternoon, and I think what many of us have as our professional missions, which is to figure out ways to reconcile these competing interests for our precious resources, the coasts, the waterfront, and the oceans. I must also thank the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation not only for the opportunity to speak today and to be the moderator for this panel, but also for bringing together these diverse interests into one room to have a conversation, which I think is so incredibly important. Today, joined on this panel by some really remarkable speakers as well. William Ayala from Hawaii. He's the chairman of the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources. Lynn Richards, the policy director for EPA's Office of Sustainable Communities. Kent Satterley, the offshore and U.S. regulatory policy manager for Shell Upstreams America, and also has some important family relationships as well. But I think it's actually his professional accreditations that got him on the panel. And finally, our last speaker this afternoon will be Bruce Popham, the owner of Marathon Boatyard in the Florida Keys. We really have an excellent group this afternoon to discuss these issues and bring with all of us bring with us, I think, a very unique standpoint to discuss these issues. From my perspective, I'm from New York City, and when I say that I'm from New York City, I think many of you probably think of our skyline, our speeding taxis, the plays on Broadway. You probably don't think about New York as a waterfront city, and yet we very much are. We have 520 miles of waterfront. That's larger than the combined waterfronts of San Francisco, Seattle, and Chicago. With 520 miles of waterfront, the diversity of our waterfront is really quite remarkable. From the protected wetlands of Jamaica Bay to the urbanized waterfronts of lining the shores of Manhattan to the port. And all of this diversity really speaks to the need for good planning. But it goes deeper than that as well. New York City grew because of our waterfront. Prior to European settlements, the Lenape Native American tribes that were located on what later became Manhattan, located there because of the natural resources that were presented in the harbor. And then when the first European settlers came, the Dutch settlers came to New York, they chose that location because of the abundance of natural resources in the harbor, as well as the fact that New York's harbor was a safe harbor physically. It was protected from the oceans and from coastal storms. And yet it also provided quick and easy access out into the oceans. And fast forwarding several centuries, New York grew to be the largest port on the East Coast and actually remains the largest port on the East Coast even today. And yet somehow over the past couple of decades, we've begun to lose our connection with that waterfront. Jobs moved off the waterfront, industries changed because of a whole host of factors. And so we no longer began to think of New York as a waterfront. If you were to ask a New Yorker in the 1800s, late 1800s, about New York City's life, it would be focused on the waterfront. You ask a New Yorker from the 1980s about the city, and the last thing on their mind was the waterfront. But over the past 10 years, we've really begun to reconnect with the waterfront. We've rezoned over 700 acres of waterfront land to allow and to encourage new waterfront uses. We've built over 20 miles of waterfront pathways and bikeways. And we've built over 300 acres of new waterfront parks. But additionally, we've also now have significantly increased our water quality. It's the cleanest it's been in well over 100 years. As a result of all of that, we've had this great momentum, and yet we are now facing significantly new challenges. And that's why in 2010 we launched Vision 2020, the city's new comprehensive waterfront plan, which is to present that long-term vision for the city's waterfront. But with that, we've also established the priorities of the next 3 years, coinciding with the mayoral term. These are $3.3 billion worth of projects that we're going to be pursuing. That includes capital projects for water quality, for public access, but as importantly, it includes regulatory changes that we're going to be pursuing, including changes to our coastal zone management program to encourage the type of development that we want to see, to encourage the types of positive change on the waterfront that we want to see. All of that is necessary so that we could have a mechanism for reconciling these competing interests on the waterfront. With that, let me turn it over to William to speak about his experience in Hawaii. Thank you.
So aloha and aloha from Hawaii, and thank you everyone to attending, as well as thank you to the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for sponsoring this. I want to start off with sort of a wake you up. Here's a chant that we do to remind people about starting the day and about pulling together in one direction. It's a really short one. So, e ala e kahiki e ala e kahiki e hume kamalo ai ka ai e hopu kalima I ka hoi a hoi. And it talks about getting ready in the morning, girding your loins, grabbing that paddle, and getting ready to take that first stroke. And that's really why we're all here today, right? We're going to hear the talk, but after the talk comes the work. And that's really what we need to do. So let me get going because she's timing. So here we have in front of you, this is an ahupua'a. 2 words that I want you to take away from the presentation, ahupua'a. That's what an ahupua'a is. It's basically a pie-shaped geographical area from the top of the mountains to the sea. In this particular slide, we have some beautiful mountains, a beautiful grass area, and a fish pond, and then the ocean from there. The other word that I wanted you to take home today with you is kuleana. Kuleana is responsibility and privilege. And when you're a young person, you're given responsibility. When you demonstrate that you have the responsibility, that you understand it, then you're given the privilege. And that's very important because talking about it and then doing it, talking about it is understanding. Being given the privilege means you actually know how to do it. Okay, so real quickly, we're going to talk about the natural and biographical history. We're going to talk about cultural significance, present-day challenges, and integrated strategies. Sorry, I'm Hawaiian Portuguese, so if I don't move my hands, I won't be able to talk. Seriously, come to Hawaii. Everybody's Portuguese, got to use their hands. So basically, this is the Hawaiian Island archipelago. If you were to put it on a map of the United States, it would stretch from the East Coast to Texas, basically. And as you can see, Hawaii, unique ecosystems from the top of the mountain to the deep blue sea. We have all kinds of habitats, alpine, rainforest, desert, coastal, wetlands, alkaline forest, and freshwater. Basically, colonization began with the arrival of Polynesians around 400 AD. There's lots of discussion about that. Could be earlier, and then later on Western explorers. And then today we have more than a million people in Hawaii, with about 800 of them living on the island of Oahu. The cultural significance is that Hawaiians are part of the ecosystem, not separate from it, but part of it. In fact, we have a relationship. And to even go further than that, we have a reciprocal relationship. We have a relationship in that we are responsible for it, and it is responsible for us. The difference is the ecosystem is not put there for us to take advantage of. It's put there for us to take care of, and in return, it will take care of us. The reason they have the canoe there is the canoe started off as a tree. The tree has a life. The life didn't go away when we cut the tree down. The spirit of the tree just transformed into the spirit of the canoe. That is the difference. It doesn't go away. It just keeps on going. So that word ahupua again. In a properly managed ahupua, you can see that the watershed is managed. The sediment load is taken care of and taken care of in the taro patches, in the growing of food for the community. The nutrients makes its way down to a coral reef that is pristine, and the people and the land is happy. The Kanawai, the guy with the club about to strike the person who broke the law, that was a responsibility. If you didn't take care of the resources, you weren't taken care of. Real simple. Okay. Fish ponds, of course, that circular wall right there was meant to increase productivity, because as the population in Hawaii grew after colonization, there had to be ways to deal with increasing population. Today's problems, we have deforestation, agriculture, ranching, development for tourism, dredging. The biggest threats to Hawaii right now, the introduction of ungulates. Hawaiians are responsible for introducing that ungulate. We're still paying the price today for that. The threats are loss of understory. You have the same problems in your area of the world as we have in Hawaii. However, settlement is a big problem in Hawaii. Climate change, how we're going to deal with climate change is also a challenge. In Hawaii, we have our mathematical models indicate that we're going to deal with 15 to 30% less rainfall in the next 50 years. We are the threatened and endangered capital of the United States. Plans. We have to control ungulates. We have to control invasive plants. We have to work with communities. We have to work with indigenous science and Western science. So here's a situation where it's not so good as the original. This is West Molokai. You can see the mountains are brown. You can see the ocean isn't as blue and crisp as clear. This is also East Molokai. So here's a photograph that shows where that sediment from the top of the mountain has made its way onto the coral reefs, and as a result, along with invasive species, this is what some of our coral reefs look like today. All of us coming together, government, private entities, Native Hawaiians, looked at this problem and said, what do we do? Well, from a cultural perspective, go back to the arrival in 400 AD, Hawaiians managed the reef. They managed the reef in such a way that they actually went out and weeded, and they planted the seaweeds that were important to us. So how do we do with that today? We have technology. So here we have technology, a person that's pulling out these invasive algae and sucking them up. They get to a barge, they're separated, they get given to farmers, and those nutrients get recycled. That's not enough. If we remove all the alien algae, what happens is it grows back. Again, indigenous perspective, what do? Well, Hawaiians farm the sea. Kupuna elders said, why don't you go get some sea urchins, because they eat algae, and put them on the reef. So the state has a project right now where we're growing 4,000 sea urchins a month. We want to get up to 15,000 sea urchins, and after we remove the invasive algae, place the urchins out there. This is turning out to be a great project. Last week I got to release 4,000 sea urchins on a coral reef in Kaneohe Bay, and you can see what the reef looks like after the urchins have an opportunity to eat that the invasive algae. Partnerships, what we're finding is everybody has to bring everything that they have to the table. That's the only way that we're going to solve today and tomorrow's problems. Yeah? So extensive partnerships. On the mountainside, we have these watershed partnerships across the state of Hawaii. I come from Oahu, and I come from the western side, which is the Waianae Mountain Watershed Partnership. What we're doing is we're taking a portion of that. It's a 1,000-acre cultural landscape. We got the ranch removed because of bad management practices. There's a Native Hawaiian advisory group. The plans are to go back and cultivate sweet potato on those lands, as well as restore the cultural sites that are there, to plant some edible fire break, because to honor the land is to bring forth production from the land. And on West Maui, you see the folks there collecting invasive algae. It's bringing everybody, Hawaiians, non-Hawaiians. There's even some tourists in here that have agreed to jump on board and help remove. On the right-hand side, what you see is reforestation going on the West Maui side of the island, so replanting koa forests. On the top, remember that spirit of the canoe? That was the spirit of the tree. It's translated into the spirit of the people moving forward, all of us together. An integral part on West Maui of the Ka'anapali coast is, you ask Kupuna, how do you deal with invasive species? How do you deal with runoff from land, creating an environment that's no longer natural? All of the high nutrient overload, nitrogen, you have different plants growing. What you do is, they say, well, keep the herbivores there. Don't take any herbivores. So we passed a rule. We created a management area. It's illegal to take any herbivores from that area now. It's having a huge impact. The coral is coming back. It's community involvement. Here we have that original slide. Can you contrast that with the East Molokai slide of the sediment in the water and the coral basically being destroyed? So we have a project called Mahuahua Ai o Hoi. Hoi means to give, so the giving of the food, and the Mahuahua refers to the fruit. When the word is doubled, what it does is it emphasizes the idea of productivity. And so the restoration of a watershed and a fish pond and a coral reef all in one ahupua'a. Primary goal is to protect coral reefs through the management of the watershed resources. The plant, very important. This is kalo or taro. The relationship between taro and Native Hawaiian people. When the Sky Father and the Earth Mother met and had their first child, the first child was stillborn. That child was buried, and out of that grave came the kalo plant. So the kalo plant is very important to Native Hawaiians. It is our eldest member of our family, and you can see how important it is to the management of the watershed. So this group, with the Nature Conservancy, with the state of Hawaii, with many, many other partners, are taking this watershed, which is a flood area, opening up the old taro patches, creating this sediment trap, creating food, and my time is almost up. Thank you very much for your opportunity. Sorry I had to rush through it, but this is what it is. Okay, I'm going to introduce Lynn Richards. Lynn?
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's not my PowerPoint. So, pardon? Oh. Sorry, I'm being learning impaired. Everyone, thank you so much for coming to hear us today. I'm so glad that William started off with talking about the sea, because I'm going to shift us a little bit onto the land, because when we're talking about our coastal resources, what we're finding is there is an intricate link between land and water. Where's the whatchamacallit, all of this technology. So I want to start with a story. I don't have a song for you, I'm so sorry. But I will start with a story. About 10 years ago, I was working with someone from Rhode Island Sea Grant, and we were stranded on Aquidneck Island, which is off of Rhode Island, and we were in a snowstorm, and the bridge was closed, and we couldn't get back to where we were going. We were delivering technical assistance to 3 communities there on how to change their codes and ordinances. And Pam and I got into a very heated debate. Lynn, what are you as EPA doing about our coastal communities? It's like, well, Pam, we've got our technical assistance, we have the smart growth principles. No, Lynn, you don't understand that when you're developing right next to the water, right next to the coast, it is different than if you're developing in Idaho. Don't you understand that? Pam, I think you're just getting a little bit too passionate about this. Let's talk about it. No, no, no. So if you can imagine, we're in this car in the middle of a snowstorm, and it's late at night, and we're having this conversation. But in the end, she prevailed, because I realized what she was saying. And what she was saying is, you're absolutely right, that if we really want to protect our coastal and water resources, we absolutely have to pay attention to what is happening on the land. And it makes a lot of sense. So if you look at where and how we're growing right now as a nation, we find that coastal communities cover less than 17% of the land area in the United States, yet what we're finding is that more than half the population is living in the United States. And really, when you're projecting forward, even more people will be moving to the coast. And why? It makes a lot of sense that there's such pressure to develop the coast, because in many ways our waterfront and coastal communities represent a competitive advantage. So William focused the bulk of his talk on the ocean resources, but I bet you if you were to talk to one of William's counterparts at the state economic development to say, what is your primary economic resource? I'm asking you now. Tourism, and the reason why tourism is because of the beautiful resources in the ocean. And that, if a community can harness it well, again, Senator Landrieu got it exactly right. It's about balance. How can you harness the beauty of what is in your ocean and coastal resources, right, to maximize that competitive advantage on the land, to do it in a way that is respectful of the ocean? And I think that's what we're talking about here today. There is no doubt that not only do our coasts represent a tremendous pull, they also represent a tremendous economic driver for many of our communities. And in fact, Senator Landrieu talked about that with the shrimp and the waterways through Mississippi, and I'm sure William and Michael too from New York City, right? I think about all you mentioned the wetlands, you mentioned the ports, you didn't mention the beautiful beaches in Long Island. Maybe that's not considered part of...
No, I'd be remiss to not mention that we have 17 miles of public beaches in New York City.
And they're beautiful. But what is often lost when we're talking about finding this balance between really maximizing, as I said, the competitive advantage of finding that balance between community development and protection of our coastal resources is what we're finding now. Is working waterfronts are kind of getting pushed aside, and that is increasingly important issue that a lot of coastal communities need to support. I love to go every summer up to Maine, and the independent lobster shops, right? The independent fisher people, the shrimpers from Louisiana. This idea of working waterfronts is part of our cultural heritage. And when we're working to find that balance, we can't gentrify our coast. We can't focus solely on tourism. We absolutely have to pay attention to that working waterfront balance. I would be remiss if I didn't say something along those lines. But what we're finding is for many communities, and as William demonstrated, for many of our water resources, we're not hitting that balance right. And increasingly, we're finding our water resources are being polluted. Or as I said earlier to a friend, with all this love comes a little bit of pain. And really, that's where some of our strategies come in, and what we work on at EPA. Right? So what are some of, if we understand that our land and our water resources are linked, what are some alternatives? How can we do things differently to kind of bring in the balance and bring in that cultural and historic heritage that we've been talking a little bit about? So that conversation with Pam led to this document that we did with NOAA, one of the co-sponsors today. If you look at characteristics of successful communities, how many people have walked around Capitol Hill? Any of that on Pennsylvania Avenue? I can't really quite see. Right, kind of interesting, right? Did you know it's illegal to build Capitol Hill now? So if you think about what are the successful characteristics, what are characteristics of communities where people like to gather, that formed the basis of the Smart Growth Principles, which were established in 1996. So these are kind of good basic planning principles. You want to have a diversity of uses. You want to have stores on the first level, apartments above. You want to be able to walk and drive and ride your bike. You want to be able to have buildings that are to scale. So these are good kind of planning basic principles that we see in countries, in communities across the United States. What this document did with NOAA is that it really begins to fold in what is that unique element for the coast. So if you're talking about mixed uses, it's just not about shops on the floor level and houses above, but how can we begin to integrate our water resources uses, right? How can we begin to think creatively about not only encouraging compact development, but how can we begin to ensure that perhaps a flood zone can have multiple uses, so it allows naturally for the oceans to swell up when there's high winds. So you're not losing that space, but we're having multiple uses for it. So I'm not going to read these through, but I think that they're really important. If the smart growth principles are the characteristics and kind of the foundation for good planning, right? These elements become the foundation for good planning of what you want to see in communities and coastal resources communities, right? So, and as I said, it's a question of balance. But what we can't forget, and what the smart growth principles really don't emphasize as much as they should, is this idea of regional cooperation. And I think if Senator Landrieu was here, she would say absolutely that what happens in New Orleans can't happen in isolation of what is happening around the coast. I've done a little bit of work representing EPA in the number of task force and ideas associated with how to clean up the mess from the Deepwater Horizon and all of that. And it becomes clear that the coast spans 6 states. You know, the Gulf of Mexico, 6 states. So they need to work together. They need to work cooperatively. Hawaii, as you pointed out, is, while it's one state, it still requires cooperation. So that's another piece, is we're striving to find the land-water balance. We need to think well beyond just the municipal borders. I would be remiss representing the EPA here today not to talk about the EPA HUD DOT Partnership for Sustainable Communities, because as communities are working to find that balance, as communities are seeking to find that competitive advantage, as they are identifying where and how they want to grow, we are stepping in with resources to help them do that. To date, the Partnership for Sustainable Communities has invested over $3.5 billion in over 775 communities. And this partnership is really about helping communities achieve the vision that they want. And as one example of that, is Bridgeport, Connecticut. So it was a brownfield site that was in walking distance to the coast, new transit area. All 3 agencies invested in that. The city was able to leverage the funding, but the bottom line is we are helping a city revitalize itself, increase access to its waterfront, and really try to find that balance. So with that, I do want to say that this is tricky and complicated work, but there is no better mission for any of us to be working on. And I think that our next speaker, Ken, let me see if I get this right, Satterley, did I get that right? Yes. We'll be talking a little bit about this and about this balance from the business perspective.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today to speak with my distinguished panelists here on the important topic of planning. I just want to say for the record that I did not ask Senator Landrieu to say those nice things about me, but I appreciate that, and I think a lot of her. I'm glad to be related to her. I think she's a great senator, and she's done some great things for Louisiana and for our nation. We lived through Hurricane Katrina together. Obviously, her family's from New Orleans, and her family's home, located in the Broadmoor area of New Orleans, was under about 12 feet of water after the hurricane. And I'm proud to say that CHOW worked with the Kennedy School of Business to help restore the Broadmoor neighborhood back to it. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting very close. What I'm going to do, I'm going to speak today on the subject of planning ahead for American energy independence. We're real proud to be a sponsor of CHOW, and we take sustainability very seriously. And we think that the sanctuary program is a real important part of preserving our oceans. Which one is that? Right there? Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. What I'm going to talk about today is how we consume energy and our domestic supply. Then we're going to move on to how we find energy and produce it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gulf of Mexico and the Alaska perspectives, and then how the onshore and offshore planning processes work. On the left, the chart on the left, you're going to see the latest 2012 information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Unlike the last 30 years, our energy consumption is not expected to grow significantly. The growth in consumption is projected to mainly come from biofuels and renewables. Oil and other liquids is projected to stay about flat over the next 25 years. Over on the right-hand side, we see that the energy use per capita and per dollar GDP will be declining. This denotes greater efficiencies in how we consume energy and technology improvements. We can also see that CO2 emissions per dollar GDP are coming down, again due to efficiencies. These are just projections, but I think it points to some progress that we're making on the conservation front. On this next chart, you'll see the National Petroleum Council, where it was asked by Secretary CHOW to study our energy resources. The study completed last year shows two scenarios for meeting our energy demand in 2035. The 2035 limited case shows that we don't make much progress in becoming energy independent. The high potential case, though, shows that we can exceed 20 million barrels per day of oil production if we have access to more resources and technology innovation. This comes very close to making North America self-sufficient for oil. This is very good news. Our current reliance on imported oil is a national security risk. The high potential case relies mostly on increases in offshore production, as you'll see there, and also unconventional sources of oil, such as tight oil from hydraulic fracturing. For gas, the story is similar. North America has abundant natural gas resources. The NPC study shows that demand will dictate supply. It will be great news if our nation will be able to switch more to the consumption of more natural gas, which is possible for our industry to achieve. However, the high potential case is facilitated by access to new areas, balanced regulations, sustained technology development, and high resource size. The opportunity is there, but we're going to have to decide whether we want to pursue it. Now let's turn to geology. Hydrocarbons are found where carbon, which is decayed plants and animals, have been deposited and kept under high temperature and pressure. There must first be a depositional basin, for example, the Mississippi River flowing into the Gulf of Mexico. Earth forces create folding that results in anticlinal traps. Alternately, faulting can result in hydrocarbon traps. The hydrocarbons migrate into porous and permeable layers where they are trapped by impervious layers. They will accumulate and can be discovered with seismic exploration. Seismic involves a special use of air guns used to produce sound that is reflected from the rock layers. Detectors pick up the the sound reflections, and the arrival times each reflection indicate the depth of the rock layer, which is used to produce a cross-section of the subsurface. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Director, Tommy Boudreau, has stated that new OCS areas must have resource assessment before these areas can be included in the 5-year leasing program. In other words, there must be enough oil and gas to justify development. The diagram shows a cross-section of Baltimore Canyon Depositional Basin. Seismic acquisition and cost wells were drilled in the 1970s by an industry consortium sanctioned by the government. The stratigraphy indicates that oil and gas bearing formations are present. Now, seismic technology has increased substantially since the 1970s, and new seismic is needed to better understand what the potential is there. The BOEM is currently preparing a programmatic EIS for seismic exploration and will establish the proper mitigation measures. The deepwater Gulf of Mexico is one of America's success stories. The Mississippi River, which drains about half of the continental U.S., gave us the gift of hydrocarbons buried deep beneath the deposited sediments. But we had to figure out how to harvest them. Technology has enabled the Gulf to become a major energy provider, producing about 30% of the nation's oil supply. Pictured in the middle of the diagram is the location of the Northwest Texas-Louisiana shelf banks, including the Flower Garden Bank Sanctuary. Of note is the fact that oil and gas development has coexisted with these sensitive resources. The Flower Garden banks are some of the most productive corals on the planet. What makes deep water challenging is its water depth and its salt. Shown in the lower left is a salt formation that is pushed up through hydrocarbon zones and provides an impermeable barrier to trap the oil and gas. However, the salt also makes seismic interpretation difficult. New seismic methods enable geologists to see through the salt and find the hydrocarbon accumulations. Shell's Appomattox and Vito prospects are two such discoveries that are now being appraised and contain significant reserves. Shell's Glider discovery, shown at the right, is currently being drilled and will be produced via subsea equipment and back to the Brutus tension leg platform. Subsea production enables us to keep our environmental footprint small. NOAA's Gulf at a Glance provides a good description of the health of the Gulf of Mexico and recognizes that the future of the region hinges on the union of its coastal ecosystem, its coastal and ocean economy, and the well-being of the coastal communities. The oil and gas industry is a vital part of the health of the Gulf and has contributed greatly to its understanding. The Macondo incident was an unfortunate insult to the Gulf and its people and was preventable. We're now learning more about the effects of oil and gas on the environment, and we're optimistic that we'll see full recovery. The Gulf is truly a multiple-use region where the economy and the environment are joined at the hip. Shell and NOAA have been working together for 3 years to better predict the path and intensity of hurricanes in the Gulf. We have outfitted our platforms with instruments that send wave and atmospheric data via satellite during a hurricane. Our latest project is a sea glider that will measure upper ocean heat content. These are the types of data sets that the industry can provide to the ocean.data.gov database. Now let's turn to Alaska. Shell and other companies have leased areas in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas in the hopes of discovering oil. Shell drilled several exploratory wells in both these areas in the 1980s and early 90s. Much of the infrastructure already exists at Prudhoe Bay to ship oil to the lower 48. OCS production can significantly lengthen the life of the Trans-Alaska pipeline system. When the government analyzed these areas for lease, they determined that some areas were low in hydrocarbon potential and were environmentally sensitive, such as the Chukchi Coastal Buffer Zone, known for its marine mammal habitat and migration route. This area, shown as the area from the coast to the red line in the figure, was excluded from leasing and is a good example of how the OCS planning process works. As several of our speakers have mentioned, the U.S. has not ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty. The potential consequence of the U.S. not being a party to the treaty is that other countries can legally claim the oil and gas resources beyond 200 nautical miles from our coast. The figure shows the U.S.-Russia sea boundary, and we can be sure Russia has its eye on the 600 miles of extended shelf off Alaska. Shell has committed tens of millions of dollars to scientific studies in the Alaska OCS. By exploring for oil and gas, we are bringing to bear the resources needed to better understand the Arctic ecosystem. As part of our Alaska venture, Shell recognizes our responsibility to work with Native communities in planning our activities and has conducted hundreds of meetings with the North Slope villages. The onshore federal oil and gas planning process is a good example of multiple use planning. The BLM manages about 248 million acres of public lands and must decide how to put the land to best use for the benefit of us all. Similarly, the OCS planning process involves long-held policies of public engagement, evaluation of multiple use ocean activities, and an ecosystem approach through the Environmental Studies Program of the BOEM. This program spends about $20 million a year on environmental studies. The OCS Lands Act lays out a clear path for multiple use planning in the OCS. The Secretary of Interior must analyze competing uses and mitigate the conflicts. The 2012-2017 proposed program provides a clear picture of mitigating conflicts and multiple uses of the oceans. Now, in conclusion, the U.S. has an abundant energy supply, but we need to decide whether we want to work towards independence or continue our cycle of energy dependence on other countries. We need a national dialogue. Our policies are not in harmony. We must have the proper tools in place to comprehensively identify and analyze the costs and benefits of alternative uses of ocean space. We support interagency collaboration, informed decision-making, scientific excellence, and predictability, all of which benefits all of the parties. The OCS Lands Act provides a sound, well-understood framework for analyzing energy and other economic uses of the ocean and for planning for America's energy independence. And now I'd like to invite Bruce Popham up to wrap up our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm a lucky guy. I get to live and work in a beautiful place, a very special place. It's called the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Thank you, sir. It's the only barrier reef in the continental United States. It's the third largest in the world. I thought you might enjoy some pictures of our backyard here. This is the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. This is Big Pine Key, Billy Causey's home. Put that up there for you, Billy. I hope today to share with you some information on the importance of preserving this resource and how important it is to our economy and how place-based management works successfully in the Florida Keys. Now, this lobster's got his place staked out, obviously. And we do this working together with all the stakeholders. Now, here's a busy day at the reef. These are my customers out here. I own a boatyard and run a marine business in the Florida Keys, and our customers want clean water and a healthy environment to enjoy. If you look at this picture, you can see there's actually 2 or 3 boats hooked up together on each of these mooring balls. Thought you were going to see pretty pictures all day, didn't you? I want to thank Stephen Frank, a friend of mine, a wonderful marine professional photographer who's provided a lot of these pictures. Don Kincaid, who's one of our Sanctuary Advisory Council members, who was with Mel Fisher when he found the tow ship treasure, and my lovely wife Sherry for some of her photographs. There's some key facts about the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. As you can see, this is logistically a real challenge to manage. Let me see if I can get this pointer working here. All right. If you look right here, South Florida, everything you see here is with a national park, a refuge, or a state park, except this little part right here, and that's Miami-Dade County, where there's a whole heck of a lot of people. These are the parks, the refuges, and the state parks, all surrounded by the Florida Keys National Park. Our environment is our economy. Without that environment in good condition, we don't have an economy. Let me give you a perspective here. Arguably, there's 72,000 people that live in Monroe County, in the Keys. We get 3.2 million people a year that come to our Keys, plus the 4 million people I mentioned to you before. I just saw some statistics recently that said there's 52,000 homes in the Florida Keys, but about 20,000 of those homes are vacant a good part of the year, or over 40% of them. So I think actually there's less than 72,000 of us there. Our economy is really driven off this. As you can see, the sales output here is huge. It benefits the community, and we have a huge marine industry. We have the 3rd largest commercial seafood port in the country in the Florida Keys. Now, that's a lot of bananas to me. Now, that really is out of my backyard. I know you guys talk about trillions up here. We're just doing millions. We have some other visitors, too. Anybody's ever been to Key West? That's North Roosevelt Boulevard, Hurricane Wilma, 2005. We also have a few other visitors, like this nice little water spout here. My wife took that shot. I want to talk a little bit about the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council. I was chair of this council for 7 years. I kept getting the short straw. They wouldn't let me quit. We have 20 seats on the council. It's comprised of many of the businesses in the community. I represent the marine industry. We have tourism. We have the dive industry. We have commercial fishing. We have recreational fishing. We have the charter guides. We have some NGOs. It's a very diverse group of people that represent the entire community. This is important because without that input from those people, we don't really have all the stakeholders involved in what the process is. In 2005, we went through a strategic planning process with our advisory council. We snuck off to a little island someplace, sat down, went through a strengths, weaknesses, and opportunity analysis, developed a mission statement, developed 3 key strategies: improve water quality, ecological restoration, and enhance education and outreach. And we have focused on those 3 objectives for the last 5 or 6 years with working groups that stayed focused on those, that worked in those areas and came back to the council. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened in that time frame. We have a water quality monitoring program in the Keys. We measure seagrass cover, we measure coral cover, and we measure nutrient levels in the water. This has been probably one of the best amounts of scientific data that you'll ever find in a national marine sanctuary because it goes back 20 years. Seagrass cover is improving. Coral cover is starting to inch up a little bit, even though we've had some recent impact with some very cold water. And water sampling is starting to improve that we just spent almost $1 billion putting sewers in the Florida Keys. Ecological restoration. This is Ken Niedermeyer. He's the current chair of the advisory council, and he's actually putting some coral that he has grown himself that we're now putting back into the marine environment. This is that same coral here a few years later. This is one of our advisory council meetings. In fact, we did this one right after the Gulf oil spill. Well over 100 people here at this meeting, reaching out to the community, trying to explain what we were going to be doing and how we had Coast Guard there, we had the county there, we had all the stakeholders involved in really what was going on with the oil. It's a good example of involving the community in what you're doing. These are some of the things that we do within the sanctuary. We manage 767 mooring buoys for people to go to the reef and go out into the environment and see what's out there. We have some significant challenges, and now those are the things we're going to have to deal with in the future. Our panel members here have all talked about how we plan for the future. These are some of the things that we're going to be dealing with. Lionfish, an invasive exotic fish from the Pacific that is a voracious eater, extremely prolific, has virtually taken over the reef, and we're trying to work to get these guys, and they are right here in case you can't see them. They're beautiful fish, but they are really taken over. They're good to eat too, by the way.
Ones look like plants.
Very good.
Also they're poison.
This is a shark. Why would somebody kill this shark? We don't know, but this is some of the issues we have with fishing here. I know you don't believe this, but this is a room with a view, a bathroom with a view. We still have problems with discharge in the Florida Keys. This is actually one of our enforcement officers on the boat, and we found this boat, and obviously he was dumping right in the water there. It's Billy's favorite slide. Widening the ship channel in Key West is a huge threat, one of the issues we're going to have to face. Derelict vessels. The county spent $177,000 last year removing derelict vessels from our waters, and we're really trying to get a handle on this problem. It's a real challenge. Gee, I think the water's a little shallow here. What do you think? Groundings. This is what it looks like from the sky. You'd think this guy would have figured it out, wouldn't you? We also have some other challenges and stuff that we really don't have a lot of control over locally. Bleaching, climate change, ocean acidification, inflows. Talked about the Mississippi River. We get a lot of stuff comes down the Mississippi, runs down the Gulf of Mexico. Guess where it goes? It goes right around the Keys. This is a good example. This is a brain coral in Key Largo in 1985. This is it today.
Water quality.
We are now starting our regulatory and zoning review process. It's the first one we've done since around 2000. This has been driven by the community. It's been driven by the SAC. We are starting public scoping now. This is going to take us about 3 to 4 years to do, and everything is on the table. We're going to try and see what we can plan for what this sanctuary will look like in 20 years. This is place-based management at its best. A little bit about my business. We are working waterfront. We work on boats for a living. We sell boats. That's my travel lift right there. I can pull 60 tons up to 70 feet out. I know I don't look like a boatyard guy, but I am. We work on big boats, little boats. I jokingly say I'm in the toy business. Nobody needs to own a boat. It's a toy. And when times get bad, toys go away. Boats, planes, motorcycles, RVs, all those kind of things. It's been a tough few years, but we've survived that. I raise my hand and say, yes, sir, I made it. We run the only clean designated boatyard in the Florida Keys. And we do that by over 160 best management practices with my team. That means everything that we do up on the hill has to keep and prevent anything from going in the water. And you can see these guys, they have plastic underneath them here, and we clean all this stuff up. So it's a challenge. It took us 2 years to get there. We have some employees that work for fish. Actually, that osprey has been in the boatyard since I bought the yard in 1998. There's a family that lives there. They're there year-round. In closing, we have to engage our communities in place-based management, and we have to plan strategically to ensure the resource for future generations to enjoy. If we don't do that, it's our fault.
Very good, Bruce.
That's a heck of a shot there. I want to thank my lovely wife. Without her, I always throw this one in because we call this the Concord Public Air Defense. Thank my lovely wife who's here in the back. Without her, I couldn't do this. And most importantly, dogs love the Keys too. Thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Bruce.
Great job.
So thanks to all of the speakers. I think we had some very interesting perspectives, and really working at very different scales as well, from the entire island chain of Hawaii to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to the Florida Keys. You can see the scales at which we have to begin to think about these things. I think it's really it speaks to among many of the challenges that I think that we want to focus on. But I've even a more fundamental question for the panel, and that gets at why do we need to plan? Right now, the planning profession feels oftentimes that we are under attack, under threat, that we are continuing to be pressed up against the rather polarizing issues of trying to do what's in the best interest of a town, a region, or the country, butting up against the individual self-interest. And I think nationally, that's an increasing trend. And so my question for the panel is whether we call it planning or management, which I think are two sides of the same coin. How do we begin to communicate the importance of planning and management for our coastal resources? How do we begin to communicate with the public for these needs? And I think, William, you actually spoke very well about sort of the intrinsic connection between humans and the ecosystem, that they are one and the same. How do we begin to articulate that beyond just Hawaii to a place like New York City, where folks may not think of themselves as being an island community? So William, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Mike. I think the challenge for all of us, irregardless of where we live, is, and irregardless of whether or not we come from a place and have a connection to that place, is if we go back in our genealogies, we were all indigenous to some place at one time, and we all shared the same values. So it's an understanding and a recognition of those values. And when we get to that point, then we truly understand the responsibility that we have, whether it's to the place where our parents came from or to the place where we're at today. The message, of course, has to be that it is a reciprocal relationship. You can ignore it all that you want, but we have to care for the environment, and the environment cares for us. There's no other way to take a look at it.
Yeah, I might add that what we find in working with communities across the United States is that it's really important for a community to set a goalpost of where and how they want to grow. What are the priorities that are important for that community? How will it be articulated for them? And then it's not all the time that the plans get implemented, but without a plan, you end up with kind of a mishmash of growth and development, mishmash of maybe the working waterfronts will be protected, maybe not. But if you have a plan, you're setting a goalpost. If you use a collaborative process like Bruce talked about, then you're able to really provide a vision for the community. And then once that is in place, it's easier to align your waterfront regulations, your environmental regulations, your codes and ordinances, again, very much at the local level to help the community work together to achieve those goals. So that's how I would answer the why should we plan?
And Kent, from the business perspective.
Right, and I'll address this from an energy standpoint. Just over lunch, I took a break and walked over to Capitol Visitor Center where our president of Shell Oil Company was giving a keynote speak to the Canadian American Business Council on the topic of China impacts to the U.S. and China. And what Marvin Odom spoke of was the changing environment with regard to energy, and in particular how China and India and Asia are becoming huge business consumers. They want the same sorts of things that we now have. They want to drive cars, they want to use computers, televisions, washing machines, etc. And they've got a thirst for energy, and they're going after it. China is, you can say certain things about China, but one thing they're very good at is long-term planning. So they're doing the long-term planning to meet their energy needs. Shouldn't we be also? The other thing I'll mention is with regard to conflicts. Anytime you're looking at a resource extraction, there's going to be potential conflicts, and those have to be worked out. And the example that I think of so much is the way our company has engaged with the native villages up on the Alaska North Slope. When we first got there back in 2005 and wanted to drill, we were not welcome. We had to do a lot of work, and I'd like to say that Shell has done just about everything. I can't think of anything we haven't done that has been asked of us by the native Alaskans, and so that process has helped to make our project better.
Michael, for us, I hope the photographs that I put there take the message to the folks in Kansas of why that's important. When you look at the resources that William's trying to protect in Hawaii and the resources that we have in the Keys and those in the Gulf of Mexico, I think it's the future for all of us, and that's the message we try and portray by showing the people what we have out there. So it's a challenge. Why is it important to them? Why is it important to them to be careful with the fertilizer they put in the ground that goes into the water that ends up down the Mississippi, that ends up, running by our reef? That's the connection that we have to make, and it's a commitment, I think, on the part of a lot of people to be able to get that accomplished.
Now, Lynn, a question for you. How do we shift the thinking from planning to actually implementation from the federal perspective? What are the mechanisms that we should be thinking about for both on the land use side as well as coastal resources?
So I mentioned earlier the importance of your land development regulations. So in many ways, it's funny that I answered the planning question because I consider myself to be the anti-planner. What we find, Anchorage, Alaska is a great example of this. They developed an amazing comprehensive plan that respected their cultural heritage for a lot of very compact mixed-use development, walkable, really emphasizing transit choices. But what they found was that they were still getting a low-density dispersed development pattern. And when we went in to work with them at their request, we found out that their land development regulations, their subdivision ordinance, the kind of the nitty-gritty, on page 48, paragraph 3, was coding for an entirely different type of development than what they wanted to find. So it's funny you mentioned the federal perspective. Local land use decisions absolutely should be a state and local issue. The only thing that the federal government can do is to provide assistance and advice, again, to help communities meet their own choices. And so a lot of the work that our office does is to help communities do audits and assessments of their land development development regulations, there's street codes, there are design guidelines, the requirements for sidewalks, there's zoning codes and ordinances, and particularly in waterfront communities, we're now finding that goes out to almost 100 feet or half a mile into the water, and how to begin to assess that interface between land, water. And I'm sure, Bruce, you can talk, you guys even mentioned looking at that code and regulation. So when I say codes and regulations, it's not the nasty federal government coming down. It's more of helping the local governments really achieve the vision that they want through their own codes and ordinances. And I'm sure, William, you've seen that too in Hawaii.
Absolutely. It's also, real quickly, it's also earning the trust of those communities by demonstrating that you have paid attention to them, that you are partnering with them moving forward, providing information if necessary, but absolutely they're all the time that's necessary to implement the proposed solutions going forward.
William, you're absolutely correct. And the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council was created by the act that created the sanctuary. So our SAC is very mature. It's been around 20 years. When the sanctuary was created, it was not a popular thing, and we've worked very hard to communicate and to bring the stakeholders in, to get the community involved in what's going on, so they understand the decisions that are being made. And linking that, Lynn, to you, my wife actually was a county planning commissioner, so she knows LDRs and all this stuff very well. So,
LDR's land development regulations.
Yeah, thank you. So there's those links, but I think it's building that trust, building the confidence up with your community, where people believe that you're listening to them. That the management of the advisory of the staff for the sanctuary pays attention to the community and and builds what we want there based on their community input.
Then one additional question before we open it up for the audience to participate as well in this conversation. What investments are needed to drive proactive planning efforts? New York City is a proud recipient of one of the HUD EPA and DOT Sustainable Communities grants, for which we are actually, I think, doing some really great work, looking at few key nodes in numerous boroughs, but also looking at how we can best plan to be resilient to the effects of climate. And without that grant, as the Director of Waterfront and Open Space Planning, I have to say, we probably would not be able to do that work. That our resources are very much tapped out at this point for good proactive planning work. And so where do we turn for these resources? Anyone can take that.
Well, that's a challenge. Monetary resources are scarce. I think I go back, Michael, to having to be place-based. It has to be from the ground up. And it has to be the commitment on the part of the community that's important enough as a priority.
And I think, too, what I would add is that given that resources at the federal, state, and local level are so scarce, it becomes critical for the local governments to carefully analyze the expenditures that they're making to ensure that the money that they are spending can meet multiple benefits. And let me give you an example of that. And it's not the coast, I apologize, but it's a really good example. I was doing a technical assistance project in northern Kentucky with a sanitation district manager from northern Kentucky, and he was responsible for 32 communities, really reining in the combined sewer overflows. And what he said to a room of stakeholders, not unlike the room we're gathered today, he said, these are people in the community. This goes to the trust issue William was talking about. The general manager said, I can spend $1 million of your dollars and put a big tank in the ground, and that will help solve our problem. And that's going to serve one goal. It's going to really rein in our stormwater. It says, or I can begin to invest in green streets. I can begin to invest in infiltration and bio-infiltration and rain gardens at the street level in our parks that will not only help calm traffic, that will not only help create more distinctive communities and raise property values, but it will also serve to manage our stormwater. What would you rather have me do? Invest in a project that will achieve one outcome, or invest in a project that will achieve multiple community outcomes. And when you're talking about a scarcity of resources, I think we absolutely need to recognize that the era of single objective spending is over, and that it is incumbent upon our state and local officials to really begin to think creatively about their budgets and how you can begin to leverage the investments that you're making.
The only thing I would add is also to work across agency lines, because there's a lot of
Partnership.
right, exactly. So there's a lot of leveraging. There's a lot of even mixed messages that can go out from federal agencies and state agencies and county agencies. So if we spend the time up front to determine and agree upon a goal, and then earn the trust of those communities, I think we can take those scarce funds and really accomplish something long term.
Thank you very much. My name is Bob Bailey. I'm from the left coast, from Oregon. I was wondering, marine spatial planning is, you talked about the importance of planning in communities, and I've been a lifelong planner person who worked at the local level and the state level. But I'm interested in this phenomenon of marine spatial planning, which is the current buzzword. And I know that there's obviously an executive order that creates the condition for that in regions around the country. But the important part is reaching out to stakeholders and those who live and work on the ocean as partners in that effort, because it can't be just governments, governmental agencies talking to each other, although that's a big step. But I'm wondering from Kent how the industry views participation in and being really a stakeholder to drive the direction that these plans take place, so that ocean users and industries have a strong voice in how these plans are shaped.
Well, I think the first step is that we need to be involved in the process. And really we have not been. Not that we haven't tried, but there's really no room for the industry in the regional planning councils. There's no seat at the table, if you will. Now, the Gulf area has been pretty proactive through the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, GOMA. And they have just recently put out an advertisement for a business advisory council, and they're going to announce their choices of people for the council, I believe on the 19th in Corpus Christi at the all hands meeting for the Gulf of Mexico. So that's a positive development, but you know, if we're not at the table, the only thing we can do is send comment letters in with our views and speak at conferences like this. But you know, collaboration is an important tool.
Can I take a shot? I think with ocean marine spatial planning, part of the problem has been not a lack of a clear understanding of what it means. Yeah, if they'd been rolled out and simply said this is a recognition of who has used that area, who is using that area, and who will use that area, and how we're going to coexist, that would have been the simplest thing to say about this planning session, this process moving forward, and then make it available for everyone at the table to be there.
I think one of the other challenges with marine spatial planning right now is a lack of a clear understanding, at least from my perspective, of what are the tools to implement once you do have a marine spatial plan. The Coastal Zone Management Program is likely one of those tools, but is of limited, has very limited enforcement capabilities. And so it's a question that I think is going to be playing out over the next couple of days, or the next couple of years, I think. To that end, I should also mention your panel tomorrow afternoon, which I hope this topic also gets discussed, which I encourage you all to attend. Other questions? There's a question in the back.
I'm Mona Behel with the American Meteorological Society. I have a broader question. This is for William. Given the interdisciplinary nature of science, one can realize the importance of anthropology, social, political science. But there are still, given the federal budget deficit, there are still cuts in social and political sciences. How do you think can we create a better understanding of these sciences, the importance of these sciences in the government?
Well, clearly we'll never have enough money to do all of the science that we need to do before we manage. That's one of the challenges of managers right now, having enough science to move forward with a decision that in all likelihood will make someone unhappy. So the challenge is really how do we integrate past management practices and the experiences associated with those past management practices with the current state of science that we have right now to know what we don't know, and then go out and find out what we need to know in order to implement the changes necessary to deal with the problem or the challenges that we have at hand. So again, it goes back to having all of the knowledge that's accessible available to us now. Again, going back to understanding what is the additional piece of knowledge that we need, or understanding that we won't be able to get that knowledge, and just make the best common sense decision possible. Because after all, that's what indigenous knowledge is all about. It's common sense. It what applied and worked, because what didn't work was left out. So thank you.
Another question in the
It's a comment and a question, but I want to thank each and every one of you. Great talks, and William, you always make me so appreciative of Hawaii and all that you do there. And you were doing the original coastal marine spatial planning with the kapu, with what you were describing there, and that was been done for 1,000+ years. I do have a question, but I also want to make Bruce. You always make us proud. Thank you. You do great. But Kent, I want to publicly and privately on the side thank you and Shell, your company, for the partnership that we've had in the Northwestern Gulf. Shell has been solidly supportive of the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary over the years, and I wanted to get your reaction. Do you think we're good neighbors? And it seems to me it's been great, and we have a great future working together in that region.
Absolutely. I think we have been good neighbors, and I think it's an excellent example of how to have multiple uses around sensitive resources. I think we can be better neighbors. I think there's more that we can do to, for example, monitoring opportunities out there. We're currently monitoring for NOAA from all of our deep water platforms. We can add to that. Our platforms are a few of them are located in the shelf banks, not too much near the flower garden banks, but as you have so well described in the past, Billy, the nutrients and other things in the Gulf of Mexico have circulation patterns, and you need to understand everything that's going on in the Gulf of Mexico to know what's happening at the flower garden bank. So yeah, I think we can be better neighbors.
Other questions? Oh, there's a question right here.
I think one of the points that you made was that because the resources are getting pinched tighter and tighter, that having agencies work together to try to get more bang for the buck makes a lot of sense. But one of the things that you always hear industry complaining about is how slow the government is and how they lag. And so how do you marry those two goals? Because if you're trying to collaborate, that's going to slow the game down a little bit. So how do you juxtapose those two goals?
I would let me take that first, because I think that's a really great question, and it's one that we're wrestling with in New York City. In New York City, as we were writing the city's comprehensive waterfront plan, we came to recognize that our environmental regulations weren't necessarily working well for anyone, including the environment. We heard horror stories of the maritime industry, in particular, trying to get a rebuild permit for a bulkhead, and what should take about 6 months on paper, taking 7 years in practice. And when there's this disconnect between 6 years on paper and 7 years in reality, we all have to recognize that something wasn't working very well. And so we're now working with our state and federal partners in trying to establish better regulatory guidance documents so that we can foster those projects that we know we want to see happen, so that we could continue to have a working waterfront in New York City without having to wait 7 years for permits. It's a challenge, though, to try to get all of the environmental regulations, and there's a lot of them in the Northeast, I have to say, to get them all aligned. But it is something that we're working toward right now, so that we can clearly, on the outset, say what we want to see, and that could make the permitting process much easier down the line. Other comments?
Yeah, I would say that you're right, the federal government and government agencies in general work really slowly, but what we have found is through our partnership at least, and trying to align EPA, DOT, and HUD funding in communities, that we've seen an expediting of projects, because you have all the right people at the table, and so you're able to have these very real problem-solving conversations. Well, we'd like to put a transit station there, but it's a brownfield. Well, we have brownfields money. Well, we have transit money. Well, can we add some affordable housing? And we're seeing things go really, really quickly. When you bring it down to a local level, and I'm sure Bruce can talk about this, if you don't have the collaboration, if you don't have everybody at the table, while that may seem to take a lot of upfront time, it's actually going to speed up the process later on. That way, if you just try to do it straight ahead, and then there's somebody that's going to come up and just stop it, put a roadblock, because it's so easy to say no. I will certainly grant you that the partnership hasn't done as much as any of us would like to have done. We really wanted to align all of our policies, because, as Michael said, that there's a lot of policies at EPA and DOT and HUD that really are establishing barriers to doing better development, and we've identified those, and we're trying to work through it, but it takes time. But collaboration, while it seems like it's a time sink at any level, I think it's actually a time saver.
Well, I'm actually former government, so I'm coming from your angle, but I know the complaint by the government.
We're working on it.
I share that frustration as a business owner, as a member of the community in the Keys, and I think part of the responsibility goes back to the stakeholders, and stakeholders have to demand action, and they have to demand results. And if you do that, you can force these processes and solve the problems like Michael's talking about. I mean, we certainly made a lot of mistakes in our process with the council. And we will continue to do that. I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt said, you have to learn from other people's mistakes, because you can't live long enough to make them all yourself. So, we're trying to learn from those mistakes. There's a lot of solutions in this room. And I think that's the value of an event like CHOW, is that we get to share solutions. Marine spatial planning, Australia has done a wonderful job with theirs. They have some issues they're trying to resolve through adaptive management. We think we've done a good job in the Keys, and we're going to take that next step. So we're going to make some mistakes, and we're going to have to fix them. And that's where you work through an adaptive process to be able to adjust to what needs to be done. And quite frankly, our environment is changing so rapidly around us right now that we don't have any other choice.
I would only add that you have to have clear expectations, because oftentimes private sector and government sector have different expectations. At the same time, clear communication, so we're all talking about the same thing. And then the third one, irregardless of the agencies and the policies and the procedures, what I found very successful is build relationships. If you build relationships amongst the agencies, then you can pick up the phone and you can say, I think this can be interpreted a little bit differently. What do you think? And oftentimes that change can happen, and then it opens the opportunities for improvements in the problem solving.
I'd like to add that, and I'll go back and use the Hurricane Katrina example, because it's just so real to me. The federal government, I believe, has spent well over $100 billion to repair the damage and rebuild the city of New Orleans. Now, we didn't just all of a sudden come to realize that there was a problem there. We've known for decades that the city of New Orleans was vulnerable to a hurricane like Katrina, and sure enough, it came. And then later on, we came to realize that the flood walls were not designed properly. Now, instead of spending well over $100 billion and having to endure the displacement of people to other states and other cities, and the death of over 1,000 people, if we would have all acted in a way that said, okay, we know we got a problem here, and we can fix this problem for a lot cheaper now than if we wait till the hurricane comes. And I think we all need to none of us should ever lose the story of New Orleans. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, and going back to the question of funding, and I think Senator Landrieu said it best, and I really hope that she gets her legislative agenda, But the Restore Act is huge for the Gulf Coast of the United States. The money that will provide for restoration, it can rebuild the wetlands in Louisiana. And then she also mentioned federal revenue sharing. I know that's not a popular term for some folks that don't want offshore oil and gas development, but the story there for the Gulf Coast through the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act is that the coastal states who participate in that are going to get billions of dollars to help them restore their coast through that program, and it's all coming from revenues that would otherwise just go into the general treasury. It's a great program.
Other questions? Well, I have one more, so one of the joys of being the moderator is I get to ask all the questions that I have. So we talked a lot about that we're working with limited information, that we don't necessarily always have the answers out in the outset. How do we establish a management that can be adaptive to new concerns? Particularly in my mind, I think that we're only scratching the surface with a lot of these issues right now, and as we continue to do more and more planning and more proactive management on our shorelines and in the oceans, that we're going to find new issues that crop up. And I think certainly with the changing climate politically and physically, I think that there are more and more issues that are going to come up. And wondering if you could talk a little bit about, in your experiences, about how through continued processes you can find ways to adapt to new issues that arise.
This is all you.
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to, so like politics, all resource management is local. So what you have to do is you have to take a look at what has happened on the ground, who are the players there, what are the resources that need to be brought to bear, what are the impacts that's going to happen, because it's place-based, so each area is going to be impacted differently, and all the solutions are going to be different. So get out of the mindset of one size fits all. That's not going to happen. Understand that you are going to work at the lowest common denominator and build a process that's as flexible as possible, because you're going to need it for climate change. It's going to occur, and it's going to be multifaceted, and there are going to be multiple impacts, and you're going to have to deal with all of these occurring at the same time. Government doesn't have all of the money it needs to have, so the real solution is going to come from the people that live in that area. It's going to be those volunteers that you call out, that you help bring regulatory relief to in some cases, bring spontaneity and innovation to dealing with the problems that you're going to face at that local level. And then some, of course, are going to be regional level, and then bringing the people to the table that work on those regional level situations. But all we have to do is look to the past. Yeah. So many of the problems we face today are the same problems that our grandparents have faced, and oftentimes by not making the tough choices, these problems reoccur. So we're going to have to make some tough choices.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists this afternoon. Thank you.